betrayed her promise. She broke her promise. She betrayed the voters in 7th District. In the last couple of years, she's done nothing to help 7th District of Florida. So she needs to be unseated.
Is there a primary?
Yes.
When's that going to happen?
That is August 18th. We're going to have the primary election.
Do you have enough signatures? What's your plan to win the primary?
My plan right now, I want to say, is I have strongest credential. So I'm in the process to really reach out to get my message out, let people know my experience and know my platform. I'm very confident. I already started a Facebook campaign, started the field operation. So many areas already started action.
Great.
So I'm confident I can win the primary.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. We'll keep you in our list, and honestly, we'll interview you again on New Right Network, and I'll have maybe some of the other. So New Right Network Plus is a secondary arm of New Right Network where we have all conservative videos, and would be love to have some of our other podcasts bring you on. I think you are a message that needs to be heard. Honestly. Thank you, sir. And, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, by the way, can I say my website?
Sure. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Please support me. Join my force to fight against socialism. My website is yukonzhaoforcongress.com.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice day. It's Frank D'Onofrio. I'm here at CPAC, and I'm here talking with Luke Negron.
How you guys
Luke.
doing?
How are you today, Luke? Here you're running for office. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I am the only Republican on the ballot for PA 18, which covers Pittsburgh and the South Hills. Now, PA 18 was recently redrawn, so a lot of citizens of the Pennsylvania-Pittsburgh region are not knowledgeable of the fact that their congressional district was recently redrawn, which means they basically inherited a congressman in Mike Doyle, who they never voted for, they certainly never supported, given money to, and like it or not, now he is their congressman. Now, Mike Doyle is someone who has been around since 1995. I'm a big believer in term limits. That is 2 years just past when I was born. I was born in 93, so he's been around for the lion's share of my life. Mike Doyle is someone who, in my opinion, should have been term limited a long time ago. I believe that career politicians like him use their position of power to defend their position of power, and it really becomes something like a localized monarchy, and that's very anti-American. That's not right, and especially now that some citizenry in the region have inherited him who never supported him in the past. I think there are some open doors and some good steps we need to take forward.
Luke, what do you think your chances are? I mean, obviously you're new, you're young face, obviously. What makes you different, and why do you think you can win?
Yeah, so the chances are actually something I was just talking to someone about, and they're really interesting when you start looking at them on a macro level and how they reflect onto the national presidential election, which is going to be tied with the representatives and the local state senators, state congressmen, and House members and Senate members who are running. So the chances here are in a Democrat-favored district. However, Pittsburgh is not a very radicalized place. There are a lot of working class, light blue Democrats, and I've talked to many of them in my days door knocking and going to events. Every day I talked to someone who said something along the lines or akin to, look, we've got a union family. My dad was a Democrat. I grew up in a Democratic family. But this party today that calls itself Democratic is not Democratic. They're way too radical for us, and we're voting Trump. Well, I've heard that time and time again. So the Democratic majority there is really a little bit overstated if you don't dig into the numbers and see the voting history of those citizens.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm very knowledgeable about this fact. In terms of Democrat Party and and what they want to do with health care. Right. Unions are a big part of the Pennsylvania area, Pittsburgh area, because I know that very much. Unions, I know all about you guys. Okay, and I'm from the Bronx. It's yous guys, but that's a whole different thing.
Yous guys, every region has its word. Yeah.
But the bottom line is this: the unions fought very viciously for health care.
Yes.
Okay, they've got Cadillac health care plans. giving up that health care plan
Sweeps
the rug out from under them. They've given it's money that they've given away for their security, and now they're going to have to give it up. How are you going to explain that to people?
So it's a really easy explanation, and you did pretty well here. So the explanation is this: unions have kind of they have bargained away some higher wages in favor of better benefits packages, and that has to do a lot with healthcare. Now, if we centralize healthcare, as many of the socialist opponents, and Mike Doyle is opposed by two understudies, so to speak, who are increasingly radical along the same vein of thought as AOC, if we centralize healthcare as they want to do, then that takes away the very things that those unions have fought for. So now they have not higher wages and not great benefit plans when it comes to health and other instances. And then circle back around to what we're doing with the national election here. Pennsylvania is the state that won Donald Trump the presidency in 2016. Now, in Pennsylvania, a swing state, there are only so many swing districts. No one expects the districts that cover Philly to flip. We know Philly and Harrisburg, they're deep blue, they're never going to flip to red. However, Pittsburgh's in play, and if we flip Pittsburgh, we can guarantee a win in Pennsylvania. If we guarantee a win in Pennsylvania, that just might be the very key that turns to elect President Donald Trump for 2020 for 4 more years.
Well, let me add another thing to that, Luke, and one of the things that concerns me is Elizabeth Warren, for example. Another one of the hard-won fights that the unions have is over pensions, and instead of having the pensions being held by the companies, now they have 401ks.
Right.
But what Elizabeth Warren wants is they want your 401k, because what they want to do is take your money and redistribute it to everybody else. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. So this all comes into how they're going to be funding. Sorry, there are a lot of people here. It's great to have this group at CPAC, but it's noisy, and we love that. But they want to take your money to fund their extensive programs and their growth of government overreach. And taking money from your 401k is one way of government overstepping and reaching into your pockets to do the entitlement programs that they want to introduce. So
basically, while you have saved money, and you're a hardworking blue-collar American, and you save money your entire life,
Congrats.
and you want to give it to your kids. If something, God forbid, happens to you,
right,
you have a little bit extra. It doesn't go to your kids.
And not only that, so we have a kind of multi-generational issue here. So the boomers and the people above the boomers in generations can be concerned about their 401ks, which they have built for decades at this point, and now are on the chopping block, so to speak. My generation, millennials, and then those below us, have to worry about our Social Security. Anyone with access to a calculator and some basic level math knows that Social Security will not be around for my generation. I'm 27 years old. I've paid into Social Security for years on end now, with my blood, sweat, and tears, as have the rest of my generation. Social Security is going to be gone when we age out to the point where we should be collecting it. So every generation has a reason to be upset with these entitlement programs and these overreaches by government into our pockets and our working lives.
Great. Thank you very much, Luke. I appreciate your time. I got one other question for you. I'd like to run this by you. What is your feeling? Give me your feeling about how would you explain to your constituency about the effect of immigration on the culture and also in Pennsylvania and in Pittsburgh. We're far away from the border. But how does it affect you?
Deceptively. So immigrants actually have been tracked. Illegal immigrants from the southern border, and these are not all Mexicans. They are coming through the Mexican-American border. That does not mean that they are Mexican nationalists. That means that they can be immigrants to Mexico, people who travel there, and then take advantage of the weak border enforcement that we have. And ICE is doing the best that they can, but when they're gutted as an agency by our politicians and our elites, they can only do so much. So immigrants have been tracked up from the southern border, coming up to regions of western PA and Michigan, actually settling down in that generalized area. So it does affect us, even though geographically we're removed. Now, a big thing I love to point out here is definition of terms. The left loves to talk about people who are anti-illegal immigration as being anti-immigrant. No. Those are two very different things. I have a mixed heritage background. I'm Hispanic, white, and black. Those are the three main people groups that make up who I am, and I am someone who stands up and rejects that idea of being racist if you're against illegal immigration. No, it's not about race. It's not even about nationality. As I said, it's not just Mexicans coming through the border. It's anybody who can be a security threat or a financial burden because they're not paying into the system that we have established here in the United States. Borders are important because they establish where your responsibility begins and ends for your citizenry as a nation state. So, I mean, we could talk more about it, but it's a big problem. It's a financial problem. It's a crime problem. It's a drug problem, and we've seen these things negatively impacting our communities, even in Pittsburgh and in the rest of the country with our American brothers and sisters everywhere. So it's a bad thing that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Luke. I wish you
Absolutely.
luck. Have a good day. D'Onofrio, I'm here at CPAC. I'm interviewing various candidates running for political office here in the country, and CPAC is the Conservative Political Action Committee. I'm here today talking with Tim Fazenbaker. Tim is running against Doug Ruppersberger in District 2, Baltimore. And a really great guy. I met Doug about 6 months ago when he was exploring his candidacy. And thank you very much for joining me on New Right Network.
Thank you. It's awesome down here in National Harbor for CPAC. It's like Disney World for conservatives, I'll give you that.
Absolutely. Like I said, I was telling you a minute ago, I feel like I'm Forrest Gump. I mean, I'm meeting people that I got David Webb signing my Make America Great hat. So it's really a great day. And honestly, if all the people that I interview in the next couple of days get elected, it will be the biggest thing that ever happened to the Conservative Party.
I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to have a very big win, but we can't let our foot off the gas. The movement is there, and to be at a place like this and see the momentum that's here is evidence of what's about to happen in November.
Absolutely. You know, on my website, I wrote something on the New Right Network website. I wrote an article called the Declaration of American Greatness. And I came up with 10 tenets. And basically, you and I also talked about your basic idea of having candidates focus on basic ideas and ideals that they would run on. One of the things in the 10 tenets is freedom of speech. Okay, not just freedom of speech, but the Democrats have co-opted speech and created hate speech. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, when I announced that I was running, I was at a freedom of speech rally. It's paramount to who we are as Americans. Speech is everything. So you can call speech hate, you can call it whatever it is, but I'll defend your speech, even if I hate it. I wish that you would defend mine as well. To be a free nation, we need to be able to discuss whatever we want. Whether it's right or wrong in the majority of the masses, it doesn't matter. You have the right, you have a God-given right to say what you want, to express your views, to hopefully shape and mold this government that we are supposed to be creating and have people represent us with what we stand for and our values.
Yeah, another area very much importance, honestly, is the Fourth Amendment right, which of due process, which I don't know, you may not have seen it, but New Right Network, I had a scoop on the on New Right Network that while we were watching the state of Virginia, okay, the state of New Mexico enacted gun confiscation, okay, based on being able to look at your medical records or whatever they want, and they can come in and confiscate your guns. So your Fourth Amendment right is gone. Your Second Amendment right will go out the window, all because somebody doesn't like what you talk about or what your speech is. Talk about that.
Yeah, so first of all, as I said, you have the God-given right to do what you want with your life, as long as you don't take away that right from another. That is important to every single principle and every piece of legislation that comes across at the desk of a congressman, governor, president, whatever it may be. If you look at that principle, then government is limited in what they can do. The people shouldn't be limited. I have the God-given right to protect myself and my family and not have to worry about the government with improper seizures or going after any records that they think might be whatever for their benefit. We have the God-given right to freedom. there are many issues that come with mental health. I'm a former executive in the mental health care field, and HIPAA laws will come into play with many of what happens in the street. Because of HIPAA laws, we can't necessarily let people know what an issue might be if someone has mental health. So we don't have mental institutions as much as we used to have. What that means is we have a lot more people on the streets that are dangerous, and then they might grab a gun, they might grab a knife, they might grab something and do harm. What we need to do is make sure that we protect everybody's rights to defend themselves with whether it's a gun or against the government's seizure capabilities. Protect the people from that. But we also need to, if people do have a mental health issue, actually give them the help they need.
Absolutely.
Instead of them being on the streets and then violating everyone else's rights. That is what needs to be addressed in Congress. It's something I look forward to do.
Well, red flag laws are a way to circumvent the Fourth Amendment, okay? And we all know that. And the Democrats love to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. They went after the president, basically without giving him the right to confront his accusers. What's your message to your district? What's your message to your district, and why do you feel that they should vote you over Dutch Ruppersberger and retire him?
Dutch Ruppersberger's been in public office for 42 years. I'm 41 years old, so he's been there longer than I've been alive. He portrayed himself for many years as somewhat of a moderate Democrat. Never really was. Now he's full-force socialist. He backs AOC, he backs Ilhan Omar, he supports CARE, things like that. So we call him out of touch Dutch because he's not in touch anymore with the district. So under his policies in the past 60 years, we've seen places like with Baltimore have the highest crime rate per person in the country, rat-infested, failing schools, corruption all over the place, mayors being arrested and imprisoned. It's a cesspool of what happens when you have a tyrannical government and big government. What I'm offering is maybe not the perfect solution, but I'm offering to listen and to move a different direction. I have conservative values, and that's the way I look at things. But I listen to every community, and I listen to every person and say, what's important to you? Because ultimately a representative is somebody that works for you. I am not there for a job. I'm there because I want to do what's right for my children, I want to do right for my neighbor's children, and I want to do right for your children. Out of touch Dutch doesn't care anymore. It's time to bring in somebody else that cares, that will actually get the job done and make things move in the right direction.
Tim, it's really important that we get the message out, okay? That Republicans are not people that should be feared, we're in this together as a group. Being next to Elijah Cummings' district, Kimberly Classic is running right next to you. I'm a member of. I live in Maryland. So it's a one-party system here.
Yes.
And you alluded to the fact that the mayor is, the former mayor of Baltimore is going to jail for 3 years because she's defrauded the people. It's what happens when you have a one-party rule. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about how we need to turn not only the country around, start with Maryland.
Yes, so when President Trump called out Baltimore, he called out the people in power behind Baltimore and that corruption of billions of dollars that was sent there and never got down to the people. What happened was there was a awakening. So President Trump has the desire to flip a city like Baltimore and say, look, I exposed what was going on, the people rose up, and they flipped it. If we can flip this seat, which we will, it sets a domino effect for all the major cities around this country. Because it'll be evidence that, 60 years of socialism in a city, numbers go down, you bring in somebody who is all about unifying with the actions of conservative principles, we will end up making Baltimore red, and we will actually be in the right direction. All these other cities are going to fall. It's all going to start here. But we have to stand up and say, have you had enough? If you've had enough, it's time to vote in a different direction. I welcome everybody to our party. We might not be perfect, but we want your opinion on things. We will value what you have. We want you to make an imprint on our party. You already know the Democrats take you for granted. They're pushing aside everybody else for illegal immigrants. Do you want to be part of that? You'll be a second-class citizen in their party.
Well, legal immigration, is listen. My family's a family of immigrants. Your family's a family. Everybody's
Yes.
here. No one was born here. Okay, everybody came from someplace else. Okay, and the thing that makes us great as a society is that it's kind of like we're like a great football team or baseball team. Didn't matter where we all came from. We all got together and we created a wonderful nation. And now the left wants to tear us apart. What they want to do is find that, well, you're not black enough, or you're too white, or your cousin's sister's brother just doesn't agree with us, and so on and so forth. How do we bring unity? How do you profess as a candidate running? What are you going to do to include others that maybe not don't have access to things?
First thing is, in my district, it's about 60% white, 30% black, give or take. Have a heavy Jewish community as well. Historically, the Republicans haven't been going in those districts because they wrote them off as you can't win these. They've been brainwashed, or they automatically think Republicans are racist, they're anti-Semites, whatever. Well, newsflash, you got people here like David Webb, who he's black, happens to be black, but people would think that he was white, and they would call him a white supremacist, and then he would laugh, right? So we've seen those stories. We have people, they might come at me and say, well, you're anti-Jew, and I'm like, well, actually, I have Jewish heritage, and I work with, I've been to synagogue, shul, and things of those natures. And I work with Jewish groups. I go into these communities, I go into the urban communities, and I say, I fight that fight. We need to fight that fight. It's the only way we can save our nation.
Absolutely.
I can talk to everybody that's like-minded, that thinks like us, but that's just beating a dead horse, because we already think the same way. We need to expand our message. It's all about communicating effectively. It's not just going in there and saying, hey, these are the conservative principles you must do. Must lower taxes, must have, protect Second Amendment. Yeah, they're all correct, but we need to find a way to espouse those to different communities. We got to get in those communities first. That's how we end up flipping a place like Baltimore, a place like Maryland, and this entire country.
Tim, tell us about your campaign. How do we get in touch with you? What do we need to do? I know you have a fundraiser coming up next week. What do we need to do?
Yep. So this is one of the seats that will flip. This one's been identified by some people saying this has got a good chance. We will be one of the 19 seats to take back the House. So you can find me at timfazenbaker.com. It's FAZENBAKER. I do have an event Saturday, March 7th in Havre de Grace, Maryland, which is in between Baltimore and Philadelphia. And we have Brandon Strock from Walkaway Movement coming. We have people from all over the country that are going to be coming. A lot of different people running for different offices and elected officials. It's a symbolism of unity, that we're bringing everybody in, because this is a team effort to flip something like this. It's going to be historic. So I ask everybody, follow my website, find me on Facebook at Fazenbaker for Congress, share the messaging. That's the number one thing. And then if there's any other way you can help, please chip in. We'll find ways for anybody who wants to do some kind of volunteer work or anything. We want your skill set to be part of this movement.
Tim, thank you very much. You're a great American. I appreciate you being here. You're a patriot, and I appreciate your time at CPAC. Thank you very much for joining New Right Network and NRN Plus.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Frank D'Onofrio, and I'm here with New Right Network and NRN Plus, and we're here interviewing the candidate for New York District 14, if I'm not mistaken, John Cummings. Now, before we start with John Cummings, I need to add a disclaimer here. John is a close personal friend of mine. I've known John since the first day of high school. He is a man of integrity, but I know him personally, so I wanted to add that so that no one understands that I'm being biased, but I just want to mention that. John, welcome to CPAC. How are you today?
Having a great time here.
John, a couple of questions for you. Tell me a little bit about your candidacy running against AOC, who's like the darling of the left, and we all know all about that stuff. But honestly, John, do you think you can win?
I wouldn't be in it if I didn't think I could win it. I did not join this race to make some sort of statement. I am not a politician. I have been teaching high school government and civics for the past 22 years at the school St. Raymond's in the Bronx, which is in the district. And I could have very happily stayed there until its retirement time. But the election of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the advancement of her socialist policies really kind of spurred me to get into this. I felt that I had to do it. I didn't want to be sitting around 10 years from now on a 3-year waiting list for a knee replacement, saying, boy, you know what, 10 years ago I should have run for office. So that's really why I got in.
John, you're being too nice about yourself. Tell me about before you were a teacher.
I was a police officer in New York City for 8.5 years. I was injured in the line of duty and forced to retire, so I like to think that God had other plans for me. So I went back to college, finished up, did some work in the media, still work in the media, I do sports. And I've been teaching at St. Raymond's for 22 years, and I think that's one of the unique things about my candidacy, is that I have a 30-year record of service to the people of New York City. I just like to take that service to Washington.
Great. Now, John, you grew up in the neighborhood there. You grew up in the Parkchester apartments, and tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up there, and tell me a little bit about your background, because people don't understand that you didn't come from money.
No, I've lived and worked in that district my entire life, and I'll be 60 this summer. My dad was a police officer when police officers in New York City made no money. They don't make enough money now. They're underpaid compared to the surrounding areas. But yeah, my dad didn't make a lot of money, and my mom was a quote-unquote housewife who went to work, at Macy's in Parkchester later on. My sister and I shared a room. We didn't want for anything, but it was a pretty simple life and a good one. And like you said, we met at St. Raymond's, which is the school I teach in. And from there, I went on to college, bounced around a little, worked a little, and then I went on the police department. So it was a typical, I think, upbringing for those who grew up in the 60s and 70s. And the one thing I think that really is common amongst everybody our age, that late, especially early 60s group, late 50s, early 60s, is that most of us are very political. We're just a product of our times. We grew up during a great upheaval. You had the civil rights movement, you had Vietnam. There was so many things going on in the 60s and early 70s that I think you had to be political, even at that early age. And I think for a lot of us, it's lasted.
John, a couple of weeks ago, Rush Limbaugh received the Medal of Honor, Medal of Freedom, at the State of the Union address. And he talked a little bit about the president calling him up on the phone and getting him there when he was at the doctor's in Florida, had no way to get there. And he talked about the President Trump, and his attitude. And I thought about that for a minute, and I think you have it. It's a New York state of mind. Like, there's no problem that we can't overcome. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I think with President Trump, the one thing I really appreciate about him, and I'm used to this as a New Yorker, is that he has no filter. And when you grow up the way we grew up, I think he had a little more money than we did growing up, but he lived in Queens, and that's just the way people are in New York. They exaggerate a lot. I've done that a million times. That's the best restaurant in the world. That's the way we talk. But they get things done, and very often they're very forward in their speech, in their thinking. Like I said, there's often no filter. And I think it got him in trouble early on with some people, but then when I think people started to realize that that's just who he is, it's worked pretty well for him. And I've heard Rush Limbaugh talk about it. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. Yeah, I think the New York thing's legit.
Yeah, John, AOC's made a lot of noise. Okay, one of the major things that she's made a lot of noise about is the Electoral College, and I know that you have some strong feelings of that, being a civics teacher. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the Electoral College, is it a perfect system? No. But it's certainly far better than any of these suggested solutions to it. And I think everybody knows this, everybody that wants to know it knows it. If you went to a straight popular vote, it completely eliminates, A, the federal system that they created, and B, it eliminates all the smaller states and smaller areas in the country from having any voice on who the president is. Basically, New York and California would pick the president, and that would be it. It's not a popularity contest, and this is not a democracy. In fact, the framers feared democracy. It's one of the things they feared the most because they viewed it as mob rule, and that was not what they wanted. They wanted a republic, and that's what they got with the federal system, and the Electoral College is a very important part of that.
John, talk to me about freedom of speech. As a civics teacher, as somebody who can go to the district and talk to people about freedom of speech and freedom of religion, to practice religion, and the Second Amendment. Those are very key Republican issues, and I know things that you're very strong about. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, especially with the speech issue, I feel that there are a lot of people out there on both sides, on the right and on the left, who would be very happy to return to open dialogue. And because there are many people, particularly on the far left, that will come to events and shout people down and not allow certain speakers onto college campuses, that's dangerous. The free flow of ideas is what this is all about. You know, I show parts of the HBO series John Adams in my class, and the one thing that you see, and they do a great job portraying at the Constitutional Convention, or rather at the Second Continental Congress, when they're getting the whole idea of the Declaration of Independence together, there were strong viewpoints on both sides as to whether or not they should seek independence at that particular time. But they let each other speak and they worked through it. It got a little feisty at times, sure, but at least a free flow of ideas was there. And when you combine that, you know, the outward, I don't want to say violence, but in some cases it is, but just that ability to stop someone from appearing in a particular place or shouting them down when they're at a public forum, when you combine that with political correctness, it sets up this big barrier as far as communication is concerned. I think that's dangerous.
John, New Right Network had, and myself included in that, had a scoop, and we identified an article just a couple of days ago that New Mexico passed a confiscation law, Second Amendment. Now, you know, you and I from the Bronx, guns are not, all, you know, we don't walk around with guns in the Bronx, okay? But tell me about your stand on the Second Amendment, because I know you have some important and very strong feelings about it.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, anytime you see, the one thing that really has me concerned is this movement towards these red flag laws. One, it gives the government far too much power because they're ultimately the arbiters as to who is going to be hit with that red flag. The other part of that for me is I think that the left put this out in front first before they try to get socialized medicine. Because if you have socialized medicine, that means that the government has your medical records. And if there are red flag laws, the government can basically pull your right to having a firearm because you sought counsel when you were 17, 18 years old. I have a serious problem with that. And I think that that's an issue that really needs to be brought forward a bit more, is this idea of them pushing the red flag laws in front of the possibility of government-run health care. I said, those two don't go together at all.
Well, John, you were personally involved in this. You had a partner that committed suicide and didn't go and get help specifically because his medical records would be open and he didn't go and get the help that he needed, and you know, it wasn't there for him.
Well, that's kind of a different issue, because in the police department, and they're trying to rectify that now, if you came forward for counseling at any time, your ability to get on a specialized unit was nil. I mean, it's gone. What's going to happen? They have to change that whole mindset. You know, people, I would think that it's a good idea that people want to talk. That's a stressful job. I mean, I didn't do it for a long time, but I know about the stresses of it daily, and I saw what it did to people, and I know what it did to me even in that brief time. If you come away unaffected, there's something wrong with you, legitimately. But yeah. I think that you know, like I said, that's really a separate issue. But
but draw the line to red flags and think about
that's
it.
That's true. Yeah, but when with counseling in the police department, they've tried to move forward from that. You know, I would think that you would want people in the service that have the sense to say, hey, you know what, I need to talk to somebody, rather than acting in another way.
Now, and going down that road just a little bit, mental health issues are very important. Okay. And no one seems to want to point to mental health as something that needs to be looked at from from an entire nation's perspective. When we grew up back in the '60s, it was right during that time when they were throwing people out on the streets that had mental health issues in hospitals. Okay, quote unquote, to save money. What's your do you have any thoughts about that?
It's something we certainly have to have a conversation on. There's no doubt about that. I think it affects, obviously, the gun issue. It affects the homeless problem. I think most of the homeless people in the United States have either mental problems, mental health issues, or they have some sort of addiction problems. And it's something that we need to address. I'm sure you remember this back in the early 70s when Geraldo Rivera went on TV and exposed the Willowbrook Mental Hospital in Staten Island and the horrific conditions that existed. And, of course, the state's reaction was, well, we have to shut those places down. And they did, but they never built the group homes to fill the void. Interestingly enough, a lot of those buildings still exist. And my understanding is that, for the most part, they're empty. And perhaps that's something that we should look at as far as homeless people. We don't have to warehouse them, but geez, I mean, at least get them off the street, give them a roof over their heads, try to get them some help, try to review their cases on an individual basis. It would be a tremendous undertaking, but I think it's far better than having fellow Americans living in the street.
Absolutely. John, I have two more questions for you. The first question is a very personal idea that you've had about the infrastructure and transportation in New York City. And I don't think anybody knows your stand on that specifically, and how much and how important it is to the local community to enact something like that. Would you mind going into it?
Yeah, one of the things that we've proposed, or we'd like to propose should we be elected, is the construction of truck stops in both the Bronx and Queens. One of the major problems that we have in the Cross Bronx, if you've ever tried to transverse that road, is always voted the worst road in America. Our truckers, who are a very important part of our economy, they are on a time clock. They can only drive for a certain amount of hours. And invariably what happens is they get timed out on the Cross Bronx. They'll be sitting in traffic just to go that 8 miles or whatever it is. They'll be there 2 hours. And then they get forced off the highway. And there is no truck stop from the Lombardi Center, which is in New Jersey up by the Meadowlands, until you get to Norwalk, Connecticut. And what happens is the truckers end up pulling off, sitting on the service road, sitting by Pelham Bay Park, parking their rigs on local streets alongside St. Raymond Cemetery over in Throgs Neck. And you can't fault them. They have to legally get off. But I think that could all be rectified by building a truck stop. There are a couple of areas in the Bronx that we've identified. There's an area in Queens that we've identified. And it's really a problem throughout the city. But when you think about that there's no truck stop from New Jersey to Connecticut, and New York is such a big part of that road, and the fact that you time out there, that's something that we'll really have to address. And it would help the truckers. It would help the residents, because you wouldn't have the trucks on the street. It would help traffic. It would also stop the truckers from idling, because very often they do that. They have nowhere to plug in. If you're at a truck stop, you can plug in. You don't have to idle. I mean, there's a whole lot to this, but nobody seems to address it, and I would like to do that.
Great. And I'm going to the last one, which is a subject near and dear to your heart, is education, and the fact that your competitor Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, talks a good game, but her niece is now in a special program. Talk to me a little bit about your plans for education and what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that she pulled some strings to get her goddaughter out of a failing school into a charter school, but then everybody should have that ability. I mean, that's what relatives are for. But when you come out so strongly against school choice and vouchers and tuition tax credits and whatever will afford people in failing schools to give them and their child the choice, when you try to stop that from happening and then you pull the strings, it's very hypocritical. I love what Senator Ted Cruz just proposed. He introduced a piece of legislation that would give over 10 years $100 billion in matching tax credits to anyone or any organization that donates monies to non-for-profits that administer grants and scholarships to lower income people. It would be $5 billion a year for 10 years for people K through 12. And then there is also $5 billion a year for 10 years for people who have graduated high school and younger adults who are out of school to get some vocational training or perhaps some technological training, something other than college. I think it's a great proposal. As Senator Cruz points out, it also keeps with the federal system, because the states would administer the grants and they would administer how the scholarship programs actually work. If the states want to opt in, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. So that keeps the federal system in place. And I think that's a key portion of it. And the other part of it that I love is that the cry that the left always has is, well, you're going to be pulling money from public education. In this case, the money would come from somewhere else. So I think that's a great plan. Like I said, any voucher system, tuition tax credit, anything that gives a family a choice to move their child out of a failing school, education is the great equalizer. It's the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And I think that if we want people to move onward and upward, everybody deserves the opportunity, and your economic status shouldn't be the barrier.
Well, you have firsthand knowledge of that, John. You're in it, okay? You're in a low income neighborhood. It's not, it's not upper middle class by any stretch of the imagination, okay? And just for just for informational purposes, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not go to any of the schools in the district.
No, and her family moved out of the district, and I'm sure that was a tough decision. But at least they had the economic ability to do so, and they moved up to suburban New York, and they got her a good education up in Westchester County, and more power to them. But that's part of the problem. They had the ability to do it. Not everybody does have the ability to do it, and people need choice. That's why you have generation after generation after generation of kids who graduate from high school who are not up to snuff when it comes to reading and math and everything that would need you to move on in a career. We can't have that. We have to stop it. And I think the only way to stop it is to have competition. Competition is always a good thing.
Mm-hmm. John, I've been to the school. I visited. I go to Career Day almost every year. I've talked to your students. Do you have a message for them? I would like, this is the 2020 election, and most of your students are seniors. They're going to be voting either this year or next year. What's your message to the youth of America things that they would need to hear about this election?
My favorite thing to say in class when we have debates is the government that governs least governs best. And I think at the base level, I think everybody understands that. Even people on the left like to rail about the government. And one of the things I always point out is that this government was not designed so you would feel it. You shouldn't feel the government. It shouldn't be a part of your life. It shouldn't be in the front of your head saying, man, that government's in the way. And that's important. And I think that these gentlemen are at a point where they are looking to make important choices in their lives. College, vocational training, military, whatever it is. You want to make an informed choice. The way you make an informed choice is by getting a solid education. We have to make sure that everybody is in a position to get that solid education. And as you move forward, I think that people need to vote for candidates who try to ensure that for everybody.
John, last thing to say, on the Parkchester Fields where you grew up playing baseball
and my hips.
where everything happened and we basically, played ball with everybody and that kind of thing, and you've got some friends in the media that you grew up with, but we were all we didn't care. We were all poor. We didn't know it.
Dirt poor, but we didn't have much.
We didn't know it.
Didn't have much.
And I think what's important, John, is that people need to understand that you're there to represent everybody. You want to represent everybody. It's not like you're this, a white guy coming in and trying to tell people what to do.
Our whole campaign is I am you. I live in the district. I work in the district. I grew up in the district. I bank in the district. I get my hair cut in the district. I mean, that's my home. And I have lived the life that everybody else lives. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are listening to me. Perhaps they wouldn't listen to a Republican candidate. I mean, it's a heavily Democrat district, but as I point out often, it's not a heavily socialist district. People are willing to listen to it because, I've walked the walk for 30 years. I've been a person of service. There's nobody else running that can say that. And I think it's really, really important. People want local representation. People want a voice in Washington. In this District 14, we haven't had that in a long time. It was a knock on Joe Crowley. It's why Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez was able to bump him off in the primary and win the election herself. But now she's basically created a national persona, and her visibility in the district is basically non-existent. I'm not going to be that person. I'll be on the ground. I'll be in and out of the office a lot. I'll have people working in my offices to make sure that there are constituent services, not like what we have now. If you have a problem with Social Security, if you have a problem with Medicare, Medicaid, if you have a question about infrastructure, any question, or even things that aren't federal, we would certainly help you or steer you in the right direction to somebody that could help you. It's all about constituent services and representation. That's what the House of Representatives is for. When you look at why it was created, the House represented the people's interests, the Senate represented the state's interests. It's not like that now. And, of course, the president represented everybody. And I think we need to get back to that.
John, good luck on the election. and best of luck to you. Frio from NewRightNetwork.com, NRN Plus, and I'm talking today with Scott Pressler. And Scott, the president has just completed his speech at CPAC, and I believe he brought the house down. Tell me about it.
Well, President Trump has an unparalleled humor. I mean, we're so blessed to have a president that just gets us, and he's a fighter. He's keeping his promises. He laid out his record of success. He even made fun of mini Mike Bloomberg. I mean, he had the crowd just so energized. It was electric.
You know, Scott, he stole your line, though.
He did.
Okay, he stole your line. He said, thou shalt not say bad of any Republican except...
Mitt Romney. See, and I've been saying that for longer than he has.
I know, it's great. I met Scott, just so everybody knows, I met Scott at one of his rally functions in Bel Air, Maryland.
Yes.
And he's just an amazing person. I have a lot of respect for him and what he does. Scott, where'd you come from? Tell us where you came from.
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. My dad is a retired Navy captain, so I grew up in Neptune Beach. And then the rest of my life, I grew up in Fairfax, Virginia. Dad taught at the War College, worked at the Pentagon, so I went to George Mason University. And now I'm kind of on this mission to re-elect Donald Trump, flip the House from blue to red, and make sure that we expand our majority in the Senate. And I'm kind of going across the country picking up trash while I'm doing it.
Scott, I got to tell you something, okay? Because people will say, the younger generation, okay, is self-serving and so on and so forth, and you're far from that, okay? And why do you feel it's important for younger people to understand what Donald Trump is about?
Well, Donald Trump, I believe, represents saving America's future. You know, he talks about how 4 years have kind of been like a seed, but we need another 4 years in order for roots to take hold. And so Donald Trump represents more than just the Republican Party, more than just he himself. It represents the future of our country, staying a sovereign constitutional republic. Well, so I want the younger generation to really understand, like, this is about securing America's constitutional rights and making sure that we're taking care of our veterans and securing the border and stopping illegal immigration and cutting our taxes. I mean, it's so many different things, but they need to really understand in the historical context that we are securing America's future.
I agree. Scott, Winston Churchill said once, he said that if you're not a liberal when you're young, okay, you're immature, and if you're not a conservative when you get older, you don't have a brain, okay?
Yes.
And but for the younger generation out there who really need to understand what the effect of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and those people are on our nation, could you embellish on that?
Well, I want people who think of socialism as sexy or idealistic. I really want them to understand the historical context. Like, for example, Bernie Sanders just praised Fidel Castro, who is a dictator, who brutally attacked his own people, who locked away gays in concentration camps. Yes, this is true. Look it up. He locked away gays in concentration camps, and this is the Democrat Party that says you love and care about the gay community. I want you to think about Cuba, where Cubans are leaving in rafts to get to America. Americans are not leaving in rafts to get to Cuba. Think about Venezuela, where the average Venezuelan has lost 24 pounds due to starvation. Think about how every communist country or dictatorship has disarmed their people, taking away their guns before going after the people. So I want younger people and anyone that thinks that socialism is the way to go to just understand that a government that is big enough to give you everything is big enough to take away everything from you, including your rights.
Yeah, I just broke a story about 2 days ago about New Mexico and the passing of red flag laws, and the fact that the New Mexican governor has now said that they will confiscate your guns, and they're going to ask the sheriffs to do that. And she said if you don't like the law, that you can quit. I mean, this is what our country's coming to. Due process is out the window. Talk a little bit about that.
I mean, our nation is founded on innocence before guilt. You must prove someone guilty, right? And our nation is also founded on due process. I think the due process is either the 10th or 14th Amendment, correct? Or
Fourth.
Excuse
Fourth
me.
Amendment.
You have a right to due process, and look at what they did to Justice Brett Kavanaugh. To put things in context, they presumed him guilty instead of innocent, which is wrong. And quite frankly, I've seen many stories of red flag laws where I believe the person they were trying to confiscate the gun from ended up getting murdered because they were trying to take away that gun unconstitutionally. I mean, this is a danger to the public if we are not abiding by our constitutional laws.
Well, Scott, I tell you, I love the work that you're doing. I applaud you.
Thank you.
I only know you a short while, and as I say, I'm Forrest Gump. I'm just showing up at these things, and it's like, all of a sudden, in 6 months, I've just been thrown into something that I never thought, and you are a prime example of that. Tell me about, you didn't think you were dog walking,
right?
right?
Gosh, a year ago, I told my mom and dad I just quit my job and I wanted to focus on the 2018 elections to make sure that we kept the House and Senate. And I said, Mom, Dad, I said, what am I going to do? I literally had no clue what I was going to do. And now, I started off as a dog walker. Here, I've been invited to be on a panel at CPAC, the largest gathering of conservatives across the nation. Without sounding conceited, I'm the American dream. I've been invited to the White House, so I like to say that I went from the doghouse to the White House.
It's not conceited, Scott. In America, the greatest thing about this country, Scott, is the fact that if you set out on a journey,
yes,
you can achieve anything you want.
To be determined to succeed.
Absolutely.
To persevere through every obstacle, through every hurdle, to never give up, and we did it.
Absolutely. Rush Limbaugh recently, when he got the Medal of Freedom, okay, he talked about President Trump's call to him, okay, and said, you got to get here tomorrow. And Rush was at the doctor's office, and he kept coming up with excuse after excuse after excuse, and the president wouldn't take no for an answer, okay? And I think that's what's missing in our youth today. Like, they think that, well, I can't do that because. Now, I know from my generation, and I will say this, I've talked to one of my friends who's running against AOC, John Cummings. We went to high school together, okay? And I said, John, isn't that a New York state of mind? Isn't that how we operate? And he says, yeah, Frank, Donald Trump is just like a New Yorker. Everything is 10 times as big, okay? I did that a million times. Not a million. It's just that's the way he talks. Talk about that, about never giving up. I think it's really important that people get that.
Before I went to Baltimore, and I've got 1 minute for you.
Yep.
Before I went to Baltimore, I had people call me and tell me, don't go. Don't do this. And I'm glad I didn't listen to them. And the city of Baltimore denied us permits for dumpsters. I want to repeat that. The city of Baltimore denied us permits. So had I listened to all the people that told me no, had I listened to the city, because at that point I said, you know what, we're going anyway. I don't care if they file a citation against us. I don't care if they fine us. We're going anyway. And had I listened, I wouldn't be as successful as I am today. So if you are a dreamer, follow your dream. Do it anyway. Like I said, be determined to succeed. And if somebody says no, and they close that door, then you're going to find a window and force your way into it. The point is, life is too short. I'm 31 years old, but I understand that life is so valuable. And don't wait until you're 50 years old to wake up one day and say, I should have done more. I regret not having done it. Just live your life.
Totally agree. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you. And, I think you're a great man and a great patriot. Thank you very much. Thank you for New Right Network, NRNplus.com. And we're at CPAC, and this is just an amazing ride. Thank you.